Hello, welcome in the part 3 of the Java Spring Boot web service series. We will continue to develop our student controller, and the first step will be creating the method, which one will allow us to fetch the data from the database. We have to do something similar to this getHelloWorld method. Okay then, so let's get started. First method will return all students from the database. So as before, we are sure that our method must be public. Our method will be returning collection of students, so we have to use iterable interface. Also, we have to provide parameter for this interface, and in our case, it will be student. So now iterator knows what type of elements he should return. Now we have to name our method. So let's say it will be get all students. We don't need any parameters in this method, so we leave empty parentheses, and now we go to the body. Since we want to return collection of students in our method, we have to again use the iterable interface and pass our student entity as the parameter. Now let's name our collection, for example, students collection. And now we have to simply fetch this data from the database and assign to this collection. To do it, we will use our student repository, which is over here. So we type repository. And now, thanks to that, our repository is extending CRUD repository interface over here. Our repository is inheriting some of the methods, and one of these methods is findAll method. In short, in this line, we are fetching all the students from the database using students repository and findAll method, and then we are assigning the result to the students collection. And now we just have to return our collection from the method. So we type return and we use the students collection like this. Okay, so far so good, but as before, we have to add request mapping annotation to our method to make it work. So we use @sign and we type request mapping. Okay, in the parentheses, we have to define the URL under which our method will be available. So we type value equals to, and now the address. So let's say it will be /student. Okay. We will also define the request method. To do it, we have to use comma. And after this, we type method =, and now we type request method dot, and as you can see, we have plenty of them, and we choose get. Okay. So to call our method, we have to send HTTP GET request to this URL. Okay, then now we can save and test it out. To test our application, we go to the students package and we select application Java. We right click it and we select run as, and over here we click Java application. So application is starting, and after a moment it should be ready. Okay, so our application is working now. And as you remember from the last video, our application is working on the local host port 8080. After the port number, we have the /student path. So it's the place where our method is available. And over here also we have specified the method of the request, and it is set to get. Okay, so now to test it, we have to send this request, and after a second, you can see that we got the data from the database, so it is working. Okay, the next method we will implement will be the method that will allow us to get particular student. Okay, so let's go under this method and let's type public. We will be returning single entity from this method, so we don't need to use iterable interface. We can just simply return student entity. We will name our function getStudent like this. Inside the body, we want to create a new student object. So we want it to be student type, and we call our object student, and also we have to assign memory using default student constructor like this. Okay. Now we will use something that is called optional object. So let's go under this assignment and let's type optional. And over here we have to pass the type of our entity, so it will be student. Now let's name our variable optional student. By using this optional object container, we can indicate that there will be assigned a null value to this variable. For example, when we will want to find students that do not exist. Okay, now we want to find particular student in the database. So we use equal sign, and after this we use our repository. And now we can call the method on our repository using dot notation. And as you can see, here is the find by ID method. And we have to pass to this method ID of the student. The problem is we don't have this ID now. So we have to implement passing ID as the URL parameter to our getStudent method. Between parentheses of the getStudent method, we have to use request param annotation. Now between the parentheses of this annotation, we have to specify name of this parameter. So we type value equal sign, and the name of the parameter we will pass will be ID. Now we want to bound this request parameter to our method parameter. So we type long, because this is the type of the student ID, and we will also name it ID. If we are taking care of annotations, let's add annotation to our method. So let's copy the annotation from getAllStudents method, because we will need something similar. As you can see, both mappings are exactly the same, and we can't leave it like this, because Spring will not know which method should be called. We can solve this problem by specifying parameters inside of the request mapping annotation. So after comma, we simply use params keyword, and we are assigning to it our parameter between curly braces and quotation marks. Now, when our service gets request get on the student URL, we will use this method over here. And if we do exactly the same, but we also add the ID parameter, the getStudent method will be called. Okay, we can continue the implementation of our method. Now we have to check if our find by ID method has returned anything. To do it, we will use if instruction, and inside this instruction as the conditional, we will use the optional student object like this. And now, as you can see, we can use this isPresent method, which one will return the true if value is present, and otherwise it will return false. So let's use it. And now inside the body, we want to assign to our student object value returned by find by ID method, which one is held in the optional student object. But to actually access this data, we have to use dot notation and get method. Finally, we can return student object, so return keyword and after this student. Okay, so let's save it and test out our new method. So first, let's check if our old method is working. So we try this URL, and as you can see, here is the result. So this is pretty much the same. And now I have prepared second tab over here. And as you can see, after the question mark, we have the ID equals to 3. So it should return this student over here, will database. Okay, so let's try it. We click send, and here is our student. Now we can change the ID parameter to, for example, 1. And the first user should be returned. And here it is. If we pass ID, which do not exist, for example 10, and we send it, we should get nulls in the response. Okay, then now we will implement the method, which one will allow us to add new students to the database. So we will start creating new method with the public keyword. After creating new student, we want to return student object. So we type student over here, and we will name our method addStudent. Okay, then now let's add annotation to our method. We will copy this annotation over here and paste it above our method. We have to change here one thing, and this is request method. So we will replace the get method with the post method. We want to add post method because this is the HTTP method, which one should be used to add new entities to the database. And if you are not familiar with different HTTP methods, I encourage you to investigate this topic a little bit. Okay, now let's take care of method parameters. So we want to type request param annotation, and the first param will have value of the first name, and it will be the string, and we'll name it first name. Okay, now we will do exactly the same for the second parameter. So we use request param annotation, and between the parentheses it will have the value of the last name, and it will be also string, and we call it last name. We don't need to pass the ID because it will be generated, so we just have to pass the first name and the last name to create new student. Now we have to create new student object, which one will be the type of the student, of course, and let's name it new student. Now we'll use constructor, which one is inside of the student class. Maybe I will show it. And it's over here. So we need to pass first name and the last name, and this is exactly what we want. Now we use new keyword. After this we use student class name to call the constructor, and between the parentheses we are passing first name as the argument and also last name. So the new object will be created. Now we just have to save our new object using student repository. So we go over here and we type repository because this is the name of our repository. And after the dot, we are calling save method. And inside of this save method, we have to pass our object. So it will be new student. So this entire method will work like this. We will receive the first name and the last name from the request. Using the first name and the last name, we will create the student object. And after this, using the repository, we will save it to the database. At the end, we'll just return the student object, so we'll know that it has been created. Now we can save it and test out our new method. As you can see on the left window, our application is up and running. On the right, we have Postman, and I have prepared HTTP request over here. I have changed the request method from the get to post. And also you may notice that we are passing two parameters, the first name with the value of Harry, and also the last name with the value of Brown. Now we can click send, and new student has been created over here. And also, if we open the database and execute select query, new student should appear, and here it is. Okay, so now let's create method to delete students. So we stop the application and we go under the add student method, and over here we will paste this request mapping. We of course need to change the request method from post to delete. Now let's write down the method, so it will be of course public, and will return student we will delete, and our method will be named delete student. Okay. The unique key of every student is the ID, so we will use it to delete them. So first we have to use request param annotation, and the value between the parentheses will be ID, of course. And our ID is type of long, and we'll name it ID. Okay. Okay, so now let's create empty student object. So we type student, and it will be student to delete. And we are using default constructor. So we type new student, like this. Also, let's create container object using optional and passing student type. And this will be the optional student. And now, using our repository and the ID from the HTTP request, we will try to find the student with that ID. So we are calling find by ID method on our repository, and we are passing the ID. Now we will use the if statement, and inside we will use optional object to check if the student with provided ID exists. If it exists, we will assign to our student object, so we type student to delete, the object we found in the database. So we type optional student, and we use on it get method to get the actual object. Okay. Now using our repository and calling the delete by ID method, we can delete the student with the ID, like this. You can notice that we are not using ID from the request, but from the actual object we found in the database. Finally, we can return the student to delete. Okay, so now let's save it and test out our application. As you can see, application is running. I also prepared the request, and you may notice that I also changed the request method from the post to delete. First, let's try ID that do not exist in our database. So if we click send, we are getting empty object with 0 and nulls. Now let's change ID to something that exists. So for example, let's delete this Anthony query over here. It has ID 4. So we change it to 4. We click the send button. And as you can see, the Anthony query with the ID 4 has been returned. And now if we execute the select query in the database, we can see that Anthony query disappeared. The last and most complex method will be the method that will allow us to edit the first name and also last name of our students. Okay, so first let's copy the request mapping annotation. Let's paste it over here, and we'll change the request method from delete to put. Okay, now let's create method, so it will be public again. It will return the student. We'll call this method edit student. Okay, we will need to handle 3 parameters. First one ID to find the student, and also last name and first name to provide new values. To not type everything, I will just paste this ID from this method, and we will use comma, and also we will copy these 2 parameters from other method like this. Like before, first we have to find the student, so we'll use this line from the delete student method and we'll paste it over here. We will also copy this line, which one creates the new empty student object. Okay, now we can use if statement to check if we found student. So inside we will use optional student object and call isPresent method. If this optional student is present, we want to assign it to our student object. So we do student $sign optional student dot get to get actual object. Okay. Now we have to validate some things, and we will use if statement. And in the first if statement, we will check if the first name is provided as the parameter in the HTTP request. So we have to type first name not equal to null. We can read this operator as different than or not equal. Now we will also use logical AND operator, and we will check if the actual name of the student is different than the name from the request. So we have to type student because we want to use student object and we want to get first name. And after this, we'll check if it's not equal to the first name provided in the HTTP request. Okay, so if the first and the second condition is met, we want to set new name for the student. So we use student object and we are calling the set first name method, and we are passing the first name from the request like this. Now we have to do exactly the same for the last name. So we'll copy entire condition and paste it over here. Now we have to adjust this a little bit. So first we will change the first name to the last name over here, and also over here. Also, we want to change method getFirstName to the getLastName. And of course, in this case, we want to set last name instead of the first, like this. After all operations, we want to save updated student to the database. So we use our repository. We call the save method and we are passing our student. Okay. At the end, we can return the student object, so we will know what we have changed. So we type return student. Okay, so now let's save it and test it out. As you can see, application is running. I will minimize the window. This is the current state of the database. On the right side, we have the request. You can see that I have changed the method to boot. We are passing 3 parameters, ID, first name, and also last name. ID is set to 3, so we will edit the student with ID 3. And we are passing first name set to William and also the last name set to Miller. So this entity over here should be ID 3, first name William, and the last name Miller. Okay, so let's hit send. And as you can see, we set the student with ID 3 to William Miller. And now we execute the query on the database. And as you can see, William Miller is the student with ID 3. That's great. Okay, so now we will make small experiment. So we will check if our validation is working. We will delete the last name parameter. So we will have only first name and the ID. And we will set it back to the will. And now let's press send. And we got an error because the last name is not present as the parameter. So we will fix it now. Over here in the edit student method, in the request param, we have to add the one more parameter, and it is required. And we have to set it to false. And also we'll do exactly the same for the last name over here. Okay. By default, this required parameter is set to true, and that is why our request didn't work. Okay, I have restarted the application. We will try to run our request one more time. So we click send. And as you can see, we have changed only the first name. And also, if we execute the query on the database, we can see that the name is changed. Okay guys, we have created simple Spring Boot service, which will allow us to work with the entity in the database. I hope you like it, and remember about liking the video, subscribing to my channel. Stay tuned.